He has held key leadership positions for several organizations in India and Europe. In an accomplished professional with over 30 years of experience in HR, he has worked as partner and head of human capital practice for Arthur Andersen and Ernst & Young. From 1996 to 2004, he was the EMEA leader of People Strategy in Andersen and the Southeast Asia leader for People and Change in EY. He has held leadership positions at Right Management as Chief Operating Officer, India, and as HR head for IBM Global Services and Polaris Software Labs in between his consulting tenures. Without wasting much time, I request Mr. Arvind Mishra to take over and lead us to a very interesting session of change and leadership.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can, sir.
I can hear you clearly, Arvind.
All right, very nice. So what I'm going to do today in the afternoon, because this is Friday evening, so I didn't want to put a very content-heavy session for you all. I will talk to you about some of our experiences, both as an organization and also my personal experiences in the area of leadership. And I'll try to sort of encapsulate my experience through the first slide, which talks about So the first slide really talks about some of the milestones that I had in terms of experiencing some of the aspects of leadership from others. And thereafter, some of the milestones in terms of how we put it in the form for practice, which we've now been delivering through in-depth consulting services over the last 10 years. The milestones could be many, but I picked up some 2 or 3 experiences just to give you a perception of what I found is normally talked about leadership and what I found is the actual experience of leadership. The first experience I want to go back to is 1986. This is the year I joined XLRI as a fresh graduate, and I met a person called Father McGrath. He was the warden for the institute. Incidentally, Father McGrath has also written a book on management, not so much on leadership. It's called The Basic Managerial Skills. But I would recommend this book for all of you all. Basic Managerial Skills is by Tata McGraw-Hill. It gives a lot of operating practices in terms of how can you practice on a day-to-day basis. Some of the things that he told us at that point in time, I still remember because they were simple and very doable. Now, one of the things he told us is that you cannot call a person by his or her profession. For instance, we had a Dhobi in Excel. And his name was Ganori, and if he ever heard us calling him Dhobi in the corridors, he had to pay a fine for that. He had also had some very simple practices like that. You need to clean up your own mess if you create a mess. Like every campus has its wet nights, and normally wet nights end up in like the bathrooms and the kitchens and all not being very clean. So he used to send all these office staff or the campus staff who used to clean up and take care of these utilities for a holiday the day after the wet nights. And it was the responsibility of all the students to clean up. Like he wouldn't have any sort of help coming in, helping us out in that process. He also encouraged us to do something to share with the society.
Zoom meeting
So,
recording suncha.
So I think the example I'm talking about is good enough for him, so he can stay on and listen to the conversation. The third thing was that he encouraged us to contribute to the society where we worked in. So for around 3 months, we had to adopt a social institution and really work towards it. So we adopted Cheshire Home, a group of around 7 or 8 people, and we were to take full responsibility for it, from the expenses to the meals to the healthcare of the educated adults, the adults who required help over there. So that was the nature of experience I had in 1986, and it's still very clear with me. And what it told me is that leadership is not all about big strategy and big heavy speeches. It's all about doing what you really talk about doing and making it operational and making it simple and making it relevant to the other people who are there with you. The second experience I've had is 1999. I joined Anderson and I was sort of building a practice. Uh, uh, in 1999, I joined Anderson and I was building a human capital practice for India and also for Middle East. And I was probably the first non-chartered accountant person who had not been a lifer at Anderson, who was being sort of groomed to build the practice further and also towards the partnership. And therefore they appointed a mentor for me. And the mentor that I had was a person called Nitin Atroli, who's now the office managing partner for KPMG in Delhi. And Nitin's style of management was very, very minimalistic. He told me, Arvind, you're responsible for building your practice. You're responsible for your P&L. You're responsible for team. All I'm trying to do is becoming a bridge between you and the organization and helping you out where I feel you need to learn something which will help you to become a partner faster and help your practice to grow faster. I remember once I was heading the APSCB assignment for Andhra Pradesh government, and there was a huge team of almost 100 people, which was reporting into me, which was there. But Nitin suddenly took a flight from Delhi and he came and met me for 30 minutes and we had a drink and he just told me two things over there. It was a 30 minutes discussion. He said, one, you're becoming too focused in terms of the project and you're not taking care of the firm's interests in mind, because there are some other parallel projects led by other partners, which is a part of this overall projects. You need to spend time with them. So that was one input. And the second was very simple. He said, you've got to take care of expenses, because I'd given up all my expenses to my secretary and he was filing all of them. But obviously there was something in the expenses which was not correct. So, and immediately I dealt with those issues and he was gone by next morning. So that was the way he used to help me out, giving simple guidance in terms of how I can equip myself to be more successful in the firm. And he helped me in that process. And I became a partner. I became the youngest non-audit partner in the firm the following year. In 2005, the experience I had with you might have heard of this person because you're in the IT industry, a person called Amitabh Ray. He was the head of the global delivery for IBM, and I used to report into him. And I joined IBM in 2005, my first move from consulting to industry. And the first thing I remember about Amitabh is that when I went for my interview, I was sitting in the downstairs in the IBM offices in Embassy Golf Link, probably the building 3. And he came all the way down, met me over there, chatted with me for 10, 15 minutes. And then he took me up and ran a formal interview. Nobody ever in my previous experiences had come and picked me up personally when I was going for an interview. That left a mark. And ever since then, Amitabh and me were more like friends rather than a professional where I was reporting into him. And that helped me enormously in delivering good stuff as the head of HR for IBM Global Delivery. So these are some of my experiences. The only reason I quote these experiences to you is that most of my learnings on leadership, which we've then sort of converted into sort of practices, are real life and are practical. They're not based on certain aspirations about like, what was the leadership style of Mahatma Gandhi or what was the leadership style of certain other leaders. They're there, but when we work with organizations, we have to convert into a touch and feel reality, which people can use. The 2010 milestone is critical because I sort of got interested in leadership in 2000 onwards. But my major concern about this topic of leadership was that it was very vague and it was very aspirational. There was nothing tangible I was getting in terms of tools, methods, methodologies, which can be used to help a manager, which can be used to help a vice president, which could be used to help a fresher to assess himself or herself, to develop development programs for himself or herself, to find out how he or she is doing vis-a-vis a year earlier or vis-a-vis 6 months earlier. So the tangibility I found missing in my earlier studies and experiences on leadership. In 2010, that problem got solved because I was working as the chief operating officer, right? And we were doing an assignment for IBM, the financial services arms of IBM. And I was sitting in the afternoon and coaching these leaders. This was somewhere in Whitefield area. And I sort of stumbled around this tool called Hogan, which assesses different aspects of leadership, leadership potential, leadership challenges, leadership values. And the moment I stumbled on this tool, I felt this is what I was looking for. It was very specific, very tangible. I didn't have to do a lot of explanation for the tool to the participants. And the moment one took out the respective reports for each of these 20 odd senior executives of IBM's financial services wing, each of them got engaged in a conversation and became very reflective, and we could deliver something very concrete at the end of the day. The sessions went late that night, I remember. They were coaching, one-to-one coaching sessions. But from there onwards, I kept on looking for empirical, concrete stuff, which one can use to make this whole area of leadership tangible and user-friendly for the organization. And that will be my focus in my conversation with you all today. If I can go on to the next slide. Yeah. Some of the key points that I picked up in our leadership journey is that most often people think leadership is about the way they are. If I think I communicate very well, if I think I have very strong energy, if I think I'm highly decisive, I sort of define my picture of leadership and try to emphasize that more and more. But actually, that's not how leadership is in the eyes of the others. The leadership is very often the reputation that I create and the impression that I create, and not necessarily the person I am. And this will be the first concept I'll be sort of explaining to you as we go forward in this presentation. Too often, leaders invest too much in themselves as they perceive themselves, which may be completely different from the way they are being perceived from the others. Just to take an example, let's assume I think I'm a very good communicator, or if I think I'm a very good speaker, I may continue to speak and communicate very effectively or very sort of assertively with people. But the impression that my people, that my team may be having, or the impression that the client may be having, is that Arvind doesn't listen well to the others. And by emphasizing on this communication part of the leadership, which is my identity, which is my sense of the self, I'm completely blind to this concept of listening, understanding, relating to the others. And too often, leaders have a blind spot around the reputation issue, which is what one needs to pick up as you work with them in terms of leadership assessment and development. The other aspect of leadership, which is very well established now with people having like multiple degrees and masters and PhDs, etc., there is just enormous emphasis on the cognitive aspects of leadership. How well you think, how well you write, how well you communicate. Those are all important building blocks of leadership. But very often in organizations, the behavioral aspects are as important as the cognitive aspects. And too often we say that you need to hire for attitude and fire for skills, but the reverse very often happens. We hire for skills and then we start firing for attitude because we never test it out in the initial part of leadership. So I'll talk a little bit about it, again, with specific instruments and tools which are user-friendly to you all, and you can use it if you want to use it in your organization. And the third is most common aspect of leadership that I want to talk about is people have a way of becoming very comfortable in their skins. They develop a consistent routine of going to work, operating in a certain way, coming back. That pattern that we develop about how we operate as a leader or how we operate as a person stays on much beyond the requirements of the context. Because somewhere in between the way we are operating as a leader, as a manager, the context around has changed. It's become more complex. But since we are very comfortable in our skins in terms of doing things the way we want to do, we don't take to complexity very easily, and we don't change our style easily. And therefore, the sort of leadership or the sort of enablement that we do with others is not relevant to the context that we are facing with now. Current example, if you take it, with this new work environment, a lot of us will have to change the styles even after the COVID-19 pandemic gets over, because the complexities that it'll bring in our work, we need to understand it and we need to weave it in our day-to-day work. I'll talk about it again with the tool. So if we can move on from here. I'll talk to you what I mentioned to you about reputation earlier, and this is a quote from Hogan, the instrument that I was talking to earlier. It basically says that the you that I know is hardly worth knowing. What I really want to know is how others look at you and how others sort of relate to you. And that's what you call is reputation. So more and more leaders are going to be judged not on the basis of their own identities or their own sense of what they are, but they're going to judge how they are being perceived by the others and what reputation they are creating within companies in terms as leaders at senior levels, at middle levels, and junior levels. One of the instrument that I found, which is very powerful in terms of understanding the difference between identity and reputation, is Hogan. Hogan was an instrument which was created in 1983. It's an American instrument. It is used by the US federal government. I saw in your client list and I found that you work a lot with the industries in the healthcare and the education function. And a lot of these hospitals and organizations that you work with will also be using Hogan because it's widely used across the industry in the US. Most of the Fortune 500 companies use this instrument. What this instrument does is it separates the assessment of an individual from his or her performance and focuses more on the potential for the future. And it does it by using 3 separate instruments. The first is what is called the Hogan Personality Inventory, or the HPI, which looks at your personality or behavior on a day-to-day basis. This is how you are in your work environment on a normal basis. And that's called the daytime Hogan or the right side Hogan. The second part of Hogan, which is very unique to the instrument, I've not seen any instrument or any assessment doing that, is what's called the Hogan Development Survey, which looks in terms of the risks that your profile carries. It's like if you go to Telco Pune and you go to Telco Bombay, after the trucks get manufactured, they take it on a test drive outside the factory. And they go through very high speeds, very strong brakings, etc. They're basically trying to find out the robustness of the vehicle. What HDS does is test out the robustness of your personality and how well your potential will be under enormous amount of risk. Because at senior levels, people make judgments not about the quality of the work, but very often people make judgments about behavior. Let me take a political example just to illustrate the point. One of the most successful and the stable presidents in America was Bill Clinton. He had a full 8-year term. During his period of presidency, America had tremendous progress in terms of economic gains and also in terms of influential and political gains across the world in terms of forming alliances. But still, if you mention the name of Bill Clinton, there's only one name which comes up, and that's Monica Lewinsky. That's because in those 8-year periods, there was a minor lapse of judgment by the president under enormous pressure. And that lapse of judgment sort of defined his term. And that's how, as leaders, very often our profile of leaders with our youngsters, with our managers, with our clients, is not often defined by the technical quality of our work or even the functional quality of work. It is very often defined with how we come across to them, particularly how we come across to them under moments of intense pressure or moments of intense boredom. Too often in organizations, definitions about leadership and how the person is not made within the corridors of an office. Sometimes it's made in the corridors of a party which the organization is happening, and where people make a judgment that this person said the following things, and that sort of defines the reputation that we're talking about the person. So HPI and HTS sort of go hand in hand. The HPI looks in terms of your personality or potential in day-to-day work. HTS looks in terms of those unique cases where the person responds to pressure in different way and picks up those aspects of how will this person be under intense pressure over a period of time. The third part is motives, values, and inventories. Very often in organization, every organization has its unique value and culture and motives. And these are not intangible issues. These are very tangible issues. An organization can define these tangible issues by having an instrument which looks in terms on a continuum of 0 to 100 where you are on all these aspects. Like I work with a real estate firm, and we've been working with them for the last 10 years. So now we have the database of almost all the leaders in the organization who are there currently or who may have come and gone. But through the process of that, we've mined the organizational profile of that company. And when a person joins in, we basically test out the person's profile against the organization profile, not to see what's good or bad about this person, but to say that in this organization where relationships matter, where commercial aspects matter, and the third aspect is where a high sense of fun matters in the way they socialize with each other. Anybody who doesn't have them may have difficulty in adjusting, and we need to coach to adjust the person, to help the person adjust to that organization. So that's the power of an instrument like this. We use this extensively. We would encourage you all to have a look at it sometime. We could help you in finding out the source to that. But it's a very powerful tool, both in terms of recruiting as well as the leadership development for organizations. Also in terms of coaching for people who are picking up high responsibilities. The second set of instruments that I want to talk about is that too often, when we are looking in terms of leaders, we are talking about what the leader can do, how the person can work in terms of strategy, how the person can work in terms of project management, how the person can work into, all those are important. They're very important tools. And it's very important to give those tools from the age of 23 to the age of 40. But when the leaders start hitting 35, 40, 45, it's not necessarily those areas where you need to develop a leader, which is more important. Very often, and more important than the other, it's important to identify what are the bottlenecks these leaders have developed. So far, I've not seen a leader in any organization context who does not carry one or two derailers within his or her profile. And these one or two derailers that we pick up as we work hard through an organization journey of around 10, 15, 20 years, very often becomes more important for the leadership success than all the enablers that we talk about. Because without knowing it, because due to these one or two derailers, the person may be obstructing the efficiency of the other people's success. I'll take an example. I was working with an architecture design firm, and I was advising the chairman and the CEO of the company and the entire management team. It is the largest architecture design firm in Asia as well as in India. The chairman was going to become a full-time chairman, and he was going to make his CEO the CEO. And a decision was made, but he was just working through the nuances of making the process happen well and smoothly, both for the CEO as well as for the people reporting to the CEO. And when we did an assessment, this assessment tools that we talked about, as well as 360 assessment, one of the things that we found out was the chief operating officer was very poor in delegating. Every evening at around 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening, there used to be a line outside his door, because this was all the principals and the directors, etc., who were standing over there to get his approval on something that they sent to him earlier and thing. They could not go ahead in the work without getting the approval, so they're standing outside the door to get his approval before they can go home in the evening. And he sort of, in a way, enjoyed that thing because it gave him a tremendous sense of influence or power in terms of see how many people are there outside the door. I've also seen, incidentally, the same sort of lines in front of managing partners or leading partners and partnership firms. So when we were talking, the chairman, the CEO, and myself, in terms of what are the key bottlenecks, then one of the things I told him is that you're very poor in delegation. And when you're talking with senior levels and you've got like 15, 30 minutes, you've got to say it directly. So the terms may be whatever it is, but I had to tell him that you're not clear in your delegation. And not only are you not clear on delegation, you're sort of becoming a bottleneck to some of your senior leaders whom you can completely enable to run with either client delivery or a product delivery if you think they are competent in doing so. Every decision doesn't have to come to your desk. You should either pick up client-related escalations or you pick up organizational issues which you're directly accountable for. So he heard me, but he wasn't totally convinced about it. And then the next morning, I got a call from him at 7:30 in the morning. He says he wants to see me. So I went to his office. I met him around 10:30. And he said, give me some example, how I can do it, how I'm becoming a bottleneck. So I told him, do one thing. You go home today, don't talk about this context. You ask your wife, Don't use corporate language. Just simply ask her, is that, do I become a bottleneck sometimes in decision-making in the house? And if you get some examples, she'll give you a concrete example. Sure enough, he went home, he spoke to his wife. She was a practicing doctor, so she had her own clinic, so she understands all these issues. She told him, yes, he was being a bottleneck. And the example she gave him was how he delegates work through to the home staff, and how he micromanages them. And he came back next day to the office and called me up again. He said, yes, it's right. This is how it happened. So then we started working on it. I brought this example therefore just to emphasize the fact that all of us, the moment we work in the industry under intense pressure and very tight deadlines for a period of 10, 15, 20, 25 years, we all develop one or two bottlenecks. And if we can identify those bottlenecks, the gains that we gain from that is much more higher than if we work on new skills. And there are enormous number of tools available to identify some of these bottlenecks. And Hogan was one of them I talked to you about. I'll talk to you about a 360 tool later. The second part that I talked to you earlier is that too often the organizations basically hire out of cognitive skills. Understanding cognitive skills is important. It basically gives you the raw material to be successful in new positions. It looks in terms of your verbal, numerical, and conceptual skills. So at the time of recruiting, I'll strongly encourage you to use good cognitive tools. Tools which objectively give you the data rather than your judgment that the person is intelligent or not intelligent. And those tools which you use should be able to benchmark against global profiles in the industry and say that compared to technology firms worldwide and compared to leadership positions worldwide, this is the benchmark and this is how this person is fitting it. Then you have a realistic data. So I know it's important, but the problem is that we tend to get overswayed by cognitive instruments, and both in terms of recruitment and definitely in terms of development. What is even more important cognitive is understanding the fit of the person to the role that the person is doing. Just take two separate examples. You don't need the same profile for a finance head and for a sales head. For a finance head, you need a person who is much more stronger in systems and processes, what is termed as formality in the 4 elements which are shown in this sheet over here, which is basically following systems and processes and establishing processes and systems. For a sales head, you need the second aspect, which is called extroversion, your ability to go out and connect with the people. For every position, the requirements are unique. And how do you find out the requirements? You talk to the superior, you talk to the superior, as well as you talk to the successful candidates who handle the role. Based on that, you mine the data, which is shown in this case in terms of the orange line, which is what the superior is asking for you in terms of your capabilities on this aspect. What you have in the purple line is what the person fills up as his or her capabilities around the 4 dimensions of dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. Dominance means decisiveness. Extroversion means connecting to people and being social in nature. Patience means your steadiness, whether you are a steady decision maker or you're a quick decision maker. And formality is following rules and processes. This incidentally was a CFO's profile or a finance controller's profile. So therefore there is a greater focus in terms of patience as well as formality in this role. And the person concerned in this case was a lot higher in dominance and extroversion, which may not be the requirements for this role. So it's important for us to understand the role requirements and the behavioral requirements from a person, not just the cognitive requirements, to take a balanced view of people. As people become more and more senior in the organization, at junior levels, the role requirements and the behavioral requirements may not be so important, but from the managerial level onwards, they became very important. And as people become more senior in organizations, it's important to do this assessment to be successful. The last part that I want to cover in the presentation, because I think I've taken around 35 minutes, I may have some more time to talk to you about it, is this aspect of about consistency versus complexity. The average managers play checkers, while great managers play chess. This is a quote from Marcus Bingham. Essentially, an average manager wants life to be very clearly defined and to be consistent. because from consistency comes security, and from security comes comfort. But in a lot of organization contexts, unless until you're a middle-level manager with very defined processes given to your superior, we do not have an opportunity to have everything consistently and clearly defined. Understanding complexity and dealing with complexity is an absolutely critical part of the role as we get into more senior levels. And therefore, we need to encourage and we need to assess people in how well do they handle complexity. The next tool, and that's the last tool that I'm going to talk to you about from a leadership perspective today, is the 360 perspective tool. Through performance management data in organization, you normally get a perspective of how the person has delivered on the key objectives or the tasks for the year from the worldview of the manager. And very often, the manager and subordinate work together for years together. And thereafter, you will see the performance management rating becoming consistent over the years. What really happens is they make a judgment. The manager makes a judgment about the candidate or the executive or assistant manager, or the senior manager makes the decision in the first 2 years. And beyond that, unless until there's significant change in the context, the same sort of feedback continues repeating year on year. What we're suggesting over here is a tool which is called a 360 feedback tool, where you do two things. Where the first, you understand what the person's role is, but look at the person from various competencies which are relevant to the organization. These competencies could be defined into 3 clusters. You look in terms of what are the result orientation competencies which are relevant to the organization. You look in terms of the relationship building competencies which are relevant to the organization. And you look in terms of how does the person manage himself or herself? What's the level of understanding this person has about his or her own strengths and weaknesses? And how does he or she display this in day-to-day work? After you define the competencies and detail the competencies and sort of benchmark the competencies on a 5-point rating scale, then you look in terms of feedback about the given individual. And the feedback is from most of the seniors who work with the person. If it's a matrix relationship with a direct manager responsible for a given person, and some of the client relationship managers or product managers who also work with the person, you take the feedback from the matrix. You take a feedback from the peers who work along this person and know this person formally and informally in his or her work interactions and outside work as well. You also take a feedback from the team. In some cases, organizations even step out and take feedback from the client, which is an extension of 360 degrees. Once you take such a qualitative and diverse set of interaction, you get very good qualified data, not just in terms of how the person delivers on the 5 or 6 areas of accountability or responsibility that are there within his or her role. You also get an understanding of the potential for this person to grow and to pick up future areas of responsibility. And it is this aspect which is very critical, which gives you somebody who may be performing, let's say, average to above average in the role, but shows high potential with like a multiple stakeholders of around 15 people, should definitely be encouraged then to pick up their other responsibilities where he or she can grow faster. So that's the other aspect that I would encourage you all to have a look at it. And that's the aspect where I mentioned that you're looking in terms of the ability of the person to understand complexity of the role, not just the linear aspect of the 5-thing delivery aspects of the role, but the complexity involved in terms of diverse stakeholder management, the complexity involved in building good relationship with peers, subordinates, and juniors, and the complexity involved in behaving well, not just performing well. In my experience of leadership development over the last 8 to 20 years, first 10 years, I was basically sort of learning my role and learning from others, first 10, 15 years. But in the last 10 or 15 years, as I've looked in terms of the studies around leadership and looked in terms of the understanding of leadership by young leaders and young managers, that the whole focus has shifted from influencing others to becoming aware of yourself. Because if you want to be a good leader, and if your entire focus in term is influencing others, changing others, driving others, without a good understanding of what are your strengths and weaknesses, chances are you're going to have a very sort of, I would say, a conflict-prone journey. But if you have a good understanding of what are your strengths and weaknesses, how do you come across to others, what aspects of your style fit in well with others, what aspect of your style don't fit in well with others, chances are this self-awareness will help you to become a more powerful leader and also a smoother leader in the process. Because as John Masefield said, that he was basically writing in his book, and I'm quoting here, there were three men who went down the road, as down the road went he. The man I saw, the man he was, and the man he wanted to meet. So inside every person, there is more than one personality. It's what I saw about the person, it's how the person really is, and what the person really aspires to be. The trick of leadership is which one of these persons we see. The deeper we look into people and the greater we see about the various dimensions of the people we are working with, the greater the chances are of us being more successful a leader and more influential as a leader. I'm going to close my presentation with a quote which I always liked. This is not so much about tools and techniques or methodology. It's about a philosophy. No matter what happens, we need to be conscious about how our behavior is coming across to the others. Because as Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That's why you will find out those people who keep on coming back to you, and you're surprised why they keep on coming back to you, are those people whom you behaved really well with, whom you really treated kindly, gently, honestly, and it doesn't matter what you said or what you did for them. What matters to you, what matters is how you came across with them, how you connected with them. And that's what we need to keep in mind, because very often under the pressure of organizational work, all of us sometimes lose our composure, and good composure is a sense of good creation. I'll take questions now. So if we can all come on the screen and ask whatever questions you want to ask me.
Thank you, Arvind. Extremely great insight for all of us. I would request our colleagues to enable their cameras, unmute, and feel free to ask questions. You can also type in, but it would be ideal if you can actually state your name and start with your question by enabling your camera and unmuting yourself.
Yeah, Arvind, it's not a question. I just wanted to, let you know that we have very recently, started using the Hogan tool for, as part of our coaching for some of our senior leaders. So, yeah, we just started. So I think this is a great session, and there are some other tools that you talked about. I'm sure that we'll definitely look into it and see, how do we make use of those tools as well. But I think overall, an excellent session and a lot of insights into, how do we sort of manage our teams, and how each one of us becomes that leader that you talked about, right? I think absolutely brilliant insights.
I'll pass on the details of the tools to Kavita, so you all can have it. One of the areas where I will encourage you all to go to a greater usage of tools is recruitment. And the same real estate firm with whom I've worked for 10 years, and it's a real estate firm, but they're fairly progressive in nature. We use with a battery of tools over there, and the tools have become so powerful that sometimes when they're not sure about the technical and the functional recruitments, they come back to us and say, okay, what did the tool say? But yeah, in today's world and age, it's a very effective way of sort of cross-checking the recruitment process through another viewpoint.
The other challenge, I think I will just state this and let others ask. See, the other challenge today is that today, good talent is not easy to come by. So as part of the recruitment process, I think at times we do short circuit the process, and I don't know if we have time for getting evaluations done through multiple tools and techniques. So I think that's a challenge, I would say, because most of us are always in a hurry to get the talent that is available.
That's the opportunity and the problem of rapid growth.
Yeah.
I'll let you all be in the thing. But if you make the recruitment process rigor, and if you develop enough checkpoints, it will always help the process. For instance, not now, but 10 years back, the joke in the IT industry was trespassers will be recruited. And I'm sure there are some places it still gets done. So we'll let you build the depth based on your requirements, based on your operating within this team.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Gaurav here. I have a question for Arvind.
Good.
Yeah, so thanks for your presentation. It was very insightful. So what you've given us details about how to interpret the message, but then arriving at that, the right questions you ask, you get the right output. So how do you know which questions to ask? Are these questions part of the tool itself, or do you have to pick the right questions from within the set of questions, or how does this work?
So the strategic, functional, and technical questions will remain from your side, because you understand the organization strategy the best, you understand the functionality of the role, and you understand the technical requirements of the role. So there you'll have to create a checklist, I would say at a minimum of around 10 to 12 questions that you're going to ask a position. One of the mistakes organizations ask in the functional and the technical interviews is that they ask different questions from different people. Let's say if I'm going to hire a consultant, and let's say if I have a shortlist of 35 good CVs and I've shortlisted around 15 of them for the interview, if I don't ask the same 10 functional and technical questions to all 10 or 15 of them, then I'm not establishing consistency. I'm basically looking at different parameters to judge different people. So you do need to create, whoever is the manager who's accountable to have the person in, even if there's a separate recruiting panel, should create a checklist of the 10 or 15 competencies or aspects that you want to be cross-checked. The questions may vary, but if you clearly establish, I want to check out project management capability, and I want to check out project management capability in technology-driven firms, which are working in the education or the healthcare sector. You already define your metrics very clearly. So that aspect you will have to create, and I'll let you do that. But from the tools that I mentioned, what happens is you administer the tools. So let's say for a candidate, I administer the Hogan and I administer the second set of instruments, which is the cognitive and the role-based thing, which is predictive index. After I administer through the gaps that I see, I will get 2 or 3 questioning points, which I can have a discussion with the person. Because on these tools, these areas would be coming as red alerts. Like I may be finding very strong risks from this person on the aspect of, let's say, boldness. I may find the candidate too bold and too colorful. So therefore, I will ask questions around that. Or I may find too much of a variation between what the superior asks from the role in terms of decisiveness or in terms of sociability, and I find where the person is. So that gives us an idea in terms of where we can ask questions, but the questions have to be neutral, because we need to be conscious of the fact these tools have a reliability or validity of anything between, let's say, 85 and 95%. But that 15% is still there. So you will have to give the person an opportunity to clarify his point of view. Sometimes people listen to you and say, what you're saying is correct. This understanding of me is pretty correct. I do have this issue. That's a fair and honest admission of the process, which is a good starting point. But if it's a significant aspect for the job, then you'll make the judgment. In some cases, people try to give you a lot of explanation, but the way they're trying to explain, you figure out that the tool was probably more authentic than the person's answer. But you've given a choice to the person to address that issue that you surfaced. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
questions coming up. Yeah, Uday, you would like to go ahead?
Hi, Arvind. Thank you for a wonderful session. So one of the questions I had, and this is like, you identified that these are the various tools, and you can use these tools to evaluate a lot of coming candidates that are coming in. But when you use tools to see the performance or the behavioral aspects of individuals who are already leaders in the company, what are the subsequent steps? How do you bring about behavioral changes in those leaders to make a better fit for the role that they are supposed to play? So what are the instruments that we can apply there? How do we do it?
Very good. The question is very valid. Like we had that what you do after the tools as a part of the presentation, but we took it out because we thought it will become very content heavy in terms of what we cover in 1 hour's time. After you do the assessment of the person, which has these tools, also has normally a presentation which is like client focused. So you understand how the client focus or product or operations focus. So you understand how does the person apply his or his knowledge and experience to the organization context. You also do a behavioral event interview, which sort of checks the competencies that you saw in the 360 tools through a one-to-one interaction. So you get clarity on areas where there is a gap. That gives you an overall picture, and you have a report on the person and you have an understanding on the gaps in the person. After you identify that, then you work on 3 clusters of implementations for improvement. This follows the principle of 70-20-10, which is from Center of Creative Leadership, which says that people at this adult level don't necessarily learn a lot through training programs. So the Center for Creative Leadership Development only gives around 10% weightage to technical training programs. They're important, but they're not critical. 20 or 30% weightages they give to is what is called coaching and mentoring. So in coaching and mentoring, you pick up the relationship issues, you pick up the interpersonal issues, you pick up knowledge of self issues, and you coach on them. Typically, you hone down on 1 or 2 areas, maximum 3 areas, because those are the bottlenecks of a person. If the person overcomes those bottlenecks, other things will fall. And that is normally done through around 3 to 6 coaching sessions. It can be done externally. It can also be done internally by people in the organization. And senior executives of the organization can be trained in coaching skills, coaching or mentoring skills. The third aspect, which is the most important, is what's called action learning. It's based on a very simple principle. Before you make the person pick up an area of responsibility, you test the person in that area of responsibility. Like I used to work in a company called Aisha Good Earth. It was it used to make trucks, and it also at some point in time was responsible for the motorcycle, and it had various divisions in Aisha Motors. Now Aisha Motors has a very simple principle in India. If a person is being ready to be promoted to a manager's position, they will identify what is the role of the manager. And they will give that role of the manager to you as an assistant manager if you're more or less being inclined to take it, at least 6 months before. So when you operate in that role for 6 months before, if manager position involves direct client handling, or it involves in terms of direct ownership for a technical product, and that's given to you. And as you deal with those issues for the period of 6 months, there is sufficient data coming up to the management sitting above you to see how you're performing. More important, there's sufficient learning insights coming to the senior level, how to coach this person to be successful. So develop what is called an action learning program, give responsibilities to people ahead of the term once you feel they're ready for it. And the time scales could be 6 months or 6 months to 1 year, and see how the person performs them and actively coach the person, because anybody will have one success and one failure when you pick up a new responsibility, but getting them ready for the role, that exercise is very good.
This essentially learning and improving on the job itself.
On the job itself, and push the job before the person picks up the job, or push elements of the job. Just to give a very different sort of experience, in a firm that I consult in, they have a thing called management review. It's a quarterly management review where the executive management team of around 6 people takes presentations from around 30 people. So they have like 10 and then 7, 8, and then they have these 30 people. And there's another group of managers which could be in the range of, I think, 60 below the 30 people, 60 or 70. So one of the things that we encourage is that if a manager has high potential at the 3rd level, and showing extreme high potential, then why don't you push him to a MOM presentation once in 3 months? Let him not take the full presentation for the division, but let him take an initiative of the division and present to the CEO and the board, and let's see how they respond to it. So exposure, which is called shadowing, is also very helpful. So for development, those are pretty good experiences that you can work with.
Okay, right. Thank you, Arvind. Very insightful.
You're welcome.
Hi, Arvind. This is Samir.
Thanks, Samir.
We've not met, but thank you very much for the presentation. It was insightful. I think, I mean, I've never gone to a leadership training or, one of the challenges, I mean, I've finished college and then I started my first company, and then being an entrepreneur, being the CEO. So from the beginning, my first company CEO, second company, it's always been difficult to learn, or difficult. We've never gotten training. If I'd started working for a GE or any other banks, you always get training. So I've never gotten, training on how to be a leader, but I've always thought it's always, at the end of it, if you break it down, it's simple things. And I think what you presented today was all that. It's about empathy,
Yes.
It's about core values. It's about not doing more than what you think you can do, right? You know what you're good at. You can't be good at everything. Bringing in the teams. It's about, I think this quote is super, super important. It's, at the end of it, it's simple. Make people feel good. Make them feel important. So I think in this whole leadership thing, it's about, your engagement. It's about how do you make your team better, right? And so I think, that's what I've learned in my years of experience. I've not gone to class, but, maybe I need to take classes so I put some theory behind it. But it's reassuring to understand that, what my thoughts and what's in my head of what I should do as I lead. And as I get more older and get more experience, it becomes more and more evident that it's very simple. It's not complex. And that's what I want to tell my whole team. Leadership is very simple. I mean, we can complicate it, but at the end of the day, it's how you treat people. It's your values. It's understanding what you're good at and really giving direction to the rest of the team to actually make them better and get to our goals, right? And so I think, but this was great because it reaffirmed some of the things that I believe in, and I think you put it into a structure. And I think we need that structure if we're going to do this at scale and bring everyone, move everyone up and give them the guidance and the training for it. But it was really good. That was my point.
I think you said exactly what I've been trying to say. Like my personal experience in the last 30, 35 years since I've come out from campus for in industry, then a little bit of advisory work has been largely, the movement has been from energy to empathy. In the early days, I used to think leadership is all about like being smart, being effective, getting things done, being decisive. All that is important. You cannot have the second without the first. But the second part of developing a better understanding of yourself, learning from your failures, being more empathetic to people, taking the team along, making others successful, that's a more important part of the journey. And that's what we need to encourage people to pick up.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'd like to tell, my team is just that, being empathetic, and really being passionate about what we do. I mean, and I don't know if you know much about our organization. I mean, we want to build a purpose-driven organization to really spread knowledge through technology, and being passionate about that and believing in that. And then, and then our, individual core values and the values that we have as a company, which is similar to, all the good things that individuals should have, believing in that. And then, being good at what you do, right? And just executing on whatever the plan that we have and making your team better. I think that's how do we as individuals help in making your team better, and getting that confidence. So things like that I think are important. So, but great talk today. Good.
Hey Arvind, it was a good presentation. I have one question. So when we talk about leadership, there is also a part of a perception that gets created in everyone's mind. So where does perception play a role in leadership? On let's say perception about a person's perception about a person's job. So as a leader, how do we deal with perceptions?
Fortunately or unfortunately, perception is reality in corporate life, especially if it is built over a long period of time. But the surprising part of corporate life is the whole world will be talking about the perception, but the person about whom the perception is being created is very often the last to know about it. Rather than going around, I'll give you a specific example. There was this young boy, he's not very old, he's probably still around 35, 40, but he joined an organization, again, straight from college. His dad was in architecture and construction business, so he went abroad, studied, and then he went straight into the company. And there were two companies. There was a delivery company and there was the promoting developer. He initially did a stint in the developing delivery company, which is like construction and development delivery. Then he made in the promoters company in a business unit role. When he went into the promoters, he was very hands-on in the future and he rubs a lot of shoulders. Both within the company he went through as well as the earlier company because he was managing that. Within 3 years period of time, this person who was supposed to be an absolute star in terms of being creative, being energetic, very effective, start getting a lot of mixed messages. And the impression got created that this guy is not easy to work with. He gives too direct feedbacks. He doesn't work well with the team, etc. So all those aspects which go about being smart but not being empathetic. So he was a part of the assessment for this organization, and I did a feedback for him. And the feedback was strongest in terms of Hogan, strongest in the 360-degree feedback because the peers and senior and the juniors had given very strong feedback. In fact, the juniors had given neutral feedback, but the peers and seniors given very strong feedback. We backed it up with some of the gaps that we found in Hogan, and we said that you're really young and you're really doing well. The time is now for you to turn around. The person took it on board, turned around, and over the next 2 years has shown much better aspects of empathy, engagement, working well with vendors and partners and team members, and has dealt with it. So the answer to your question is perception does become a reality. The person who needs to deal with the perception, the person is the person who's creating the perception. Very often it's not passed back to the person in very organized, methodically constructed terms. When it is done, you need to give that feedback, but also handhold the given person in terms of coaching the person. The coaching doesn't necessarily have to deal with outsiders. There are enough good coaches inside the company. But when this feedback is done, we need to identify a person from within the organization, even if that person is not a direct superior to the person, but who is a good coach, and say, you need to mentor this person after we give this feedback to address this issue. Once you get confidence that you address this issue, you'll start getting reverse feedback and you would have dealt with this issue of perception.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind.
You're welcome.
Hi Arvind, this is Rinki here. Thank you for the awesome session. So my question is regarding the tools you were demonstrating. So we have seen people faking polygraph tests and other kind of tests. So is it possible for someone to cheat on these tools as well? And have you seen someone doing it?
Yeah, it is possible. Obviously, it's possible to cheat on these tests. But, I wouldn't tell you which instrument because you're using the instrument. There are elements within the instruments to tell you whether the person has cheated or not. Because you're using Hogan for coaching, So what I can say is that there are certain elements within the instrument which tells you whether this is a fake good profile or what is called the impression management profile. And normally what happens is once you identify a fake good or an impression management profile, you normally go back to the person and say that, could you take this instrument once more? And sort of nudge them a little bit to be as authentic as possible, because what we tell them is there's some contradiction coming out of the instrument, which makes your instrument invalid. If the person gets the message in the first round, then you get the right thing. If it still doesn't get the message, then you need to have a discussion that I will take your tool for discussion, but you're obviously managing perception, so I'm going to discount his scores by around 20 to 30%. But some of the tools give elements within the tool which cross-check whether you are whether you're doing what is called being a good instrument taker sort of thing, managing your impressions over there, trying to be good on all aspects of the tool. So cross-checks on that.
Thank you.
Hey,
yeah.
Hello.
Hey, go ahead.
I can hear you. Hi, Varun.
Satya, want to go ahead?
Why don't you go ahead? I'll ask later.
Hey, Arvind, I have a fantastic presentation. I really love the way you kind of, touch base on the very, very, basic. I mean, these are like simple stuff, as Samir even talked about it, but then we often forget when we, basically, when we're practicing the leadership, in reality. So yes, the self-awareness is something which is a point which sort of got stuck with me. Some of the questions which I wanted to ask about around the leadership style, if you can throw light, because we know that there are leadership style, right? Also there are autocratic leadership style, there are consultative leadership style. And as per you, what is the leadership style which you would recommend? That's one. Second, how do you see the role of having a balance of this IQ versus EQ, while performing the leadership, for a specific role? So if you can throw light on those two aspects, that would be nice.
So I'll pick the second one first, Varun, in terms of IQ versus EQ. We do a recruitment assessment instrument, which is a battery of tests.
Yeah.
We are doing that entire assessment. We give a weightage of 50-50 for managers and below, or people who we are going to recruit. So, but when we are looking in terms of leadership development, and we are looking at people who are picking up roles at more senior levels, with a greater amount of people management, we give a weightage of 70% to the behavioral tools and 30% to the cognitive tools. So that's our sort of thought through answer to this issue. I think at the younger levels and at the point of a person coming into a new role, cognitive instruments are pretty useful. But once the person gets into the role and starts managing the role, the behavioral instruments start becoming more important. And at senior levels, particularly at the level of senior manager, TGM, GM, vice presidents, etc., I would give the behavioral tools a little bit more importance, 20-30% more important than cognitive tools for effectiveness. And the answer to your first question, I think you're an entrepreneurial organization and you wouldn't like to lose that spark. And therefore, the appropriate leadership style for an entrepreneurial organization as well as a bureaucratic leadership style is very different. So if it's for the bureaucratic leadership style, I would say this: use Hogan 100% and just follow it. Because it's essentially made for organizations like US federal government, IBM, etc., where you need to establish a certain standard. But for an entrepreneurial leadership style, you would like to create windows for 2 or 3 aspects of work. You would need to create a window for innovation or inspiration or big picture thinking. You would like to create a window for creativity, and delivering what you say. And the most important thing is agility. You can't wait for like even 5 weeks for an important idea to be implemented. It's like you're going to have a discussion on Friday. You'll assign a response to somebody and start talking on Wednesday how we are in terms of proof of concept. So those 2-3 aspects should be separately emphasized in innovative, emerging entrepreneurial organization like yours. But you do have to move towards a context where the leader becomes an effective people manager. Because I've seen it time and again, you don't have to be a good ideator or an executioner yourself. The team can do it. And if there are gaps in that within the team, you get them in the team. But your job is essentially to sort of be outward looking, spending more time with the management team and the stakeholders, whoever your stakeholders are, for decision making, spending more time with the client, not just necessarily around work, but also once in a while reaching them out to them. I'm not going to talk to you about our assignment, but I want to learn about how we are doing, where we can improve. Spending more time with your people, especially those people who are not catching up in terms of doing one-to-ones with them in terms of how can I help you to be more effective? That's where you spend more time. So you primarily become a good, and I would just use the term people manager in its broader sense. You need to be a good stakeholder management. The rest of it, the team needs to bring down.
Right, Arvind. Thank you. So I understand the on the as you go high and high, you know, at the GM and the VP and in that level, you're talking about, so you're giving more emphasis on the emotional quotient. That's just a behavioral, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
yes. And I at more senior levels, IQ is way more important than EQ. EQ is way more important than IQ.
Right.
You know, when you have standalone operators, you fresh hires, etc., there you use IQ because it's a filter. It brings the people in.
Yeah.
Of a certain standard in that sense.
Right. Arvind, very insightful. Thank you.
Hi, Avinash. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can I call you Satya?
Yeah. This is Satya. Hi, Arvind. So thanks for this insightful session, especially the last slide on that, the quote from Aya. It looks, pretty much impactful. Where I am still getting some of my, ex-colleagues or previous team members calling up and asking for advice sometimes, So my question is more on, from the team's perspective, right? So given the situation pressures, if a manager cannot control the aggression, and if the team feels offended or a team atmosphere gets impacted, so is there anything a team can be trained on the other way, right? So that they are more prepared for a situation and feel that be prepared that it's not always green there, right? So you cannot sort of get a cool managers always. So is there anything we can do for the team as such?
So you were talking about team to be trained and how to manage the managers, that part you're saying.
Right. Any tools where we can get the team prepared or trained on, so that they are aware that the situations might make the manager sometimes aggressive and be prepared for such situations.
There's an instrument called it's by Bates. What's the name of the Bates tool? Impression. EXP. What is the full form of EXP? Okay, there's a tool. There's a tool from Bates. It's an American firm. It's called Executive Presence. I've been certified by it. And that essentially looks at 3 dimensions of how you relate to your stakeholders. Dimension 1 is about how you how you communicate, how you present yourself, the typical definitions in our mind of what is executive presence is. The second dimension that it talks about it, how you relate to others. And the third thing it talks about is character or values. What sort of character and values bring about. So under the Bates instrument, they have 2 instruments. One is for the individual. So you, as a leader, you take the instrument. And the other is for the team. So they will profile not just the leader, they'll also profile the team and give that feedback to the team. And once you get the feedback from the team, Bates normally coaches, or somebody who's a Bates certified person can coach the team in terms of different dimensions that they are bringing onto the table based on different parts, aspects of executive profile. So it goes again from impact to understanding to empathy and following values within the team dimension. So
Okay.
I can share those details with Kavita, and you could, a lot of it is available for public research. What's not available for public research, at least what are the, how the report looks like, I can mask a few things and share it with you, and then you can decide.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Arvind.
You're welcome.
Hey, Arvind. Hi, I'm Jagdish. Great talk today, and the subject is quite dear to me, leadership. And I love the way you talked about those milestones and the stories you talked through. My question is, for an organization like us and growing fast, there's that sense of urgency as well, right? To recruit people and move on. So and I've been working about 12 years now. So at what level does these tools and instruments become really crucial and critical for hiring?
So this firm that I this real estate firm as well as a pharma firm that I'm working in for the last, with recruitment tools for the last 7-8 years. Obviously the tools are costly. Initially they made it AGM, then they make it manager. So I think for it to be viable and practical for organization, at least managers and above, you need to have skills.
Okay, so
below
managers.
That, yeah, so because, and at the junior level, if you're going to hire fresh out of campus, that level you have a cognitive tool. Just don't have a battery of tools, at least have a cognitive tool, because whatever said and done, the ability to cope with an organization environment and complexity is very different for a person who scores 30 out of 50 on PI, vis-a-vis on LI, which is the tool I showed, vis-a-vis a person who scores 10 out of 50 on LI. Because somebody who scores 10 or less than 10 starts struggling with basic conceptual issues. And it starts showing in behaviors over a period of time. So at least to ensure that you're getting the right amount of cognitive tool in, at least that instrument you should apply for recruitment. Probably, and then as you move forward, you need to do a tool with the cognitive element plus the job. What happens in the job pro, the combination of the person's competency with the thing is, we normally ask the manager to fill it up. And the managers normally do a very good job of filling it up as long as they have been around for a while. So it brings the organization context. So that's the other tool I'll recommend. And Hogan, I will suggest that you can hold on till you start dealing with people who are above managers. If you have a lot of numbers above managers, then you can even administer Hogan of HMs or regions. So build a process, get the cognitive tool early out, right up front, because that will give you valid data right through. And cognitive tools are very valid for recruitment. Then you bring the job pro as well as the predictive indicator, which matches the job requirement plus the personal requirement. Whatever level you can bring it for discussion's sake, you can say bring it at the manager level. And Hogan, which is essentially a test of your behavioral style and your leadership potential, you bring it at the base of your leadership pyramid, let's say at the level of EGM or EG in your cases.
And if I can just add another one, in terms of your performance reviews and appraisal cycles, so for an organization like ours, do you think those objective tools would be critical, or what do you think? And any tools that you might advise?
So we for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working with 2 firms. And previous to that, we worked next to Manipal Hospital. We used the tool for Manipal, the entire group, the hospital education and the rest of the organization. We use a tool called balance scorecards to set the milestones, and it's more a methodology to set the targets, to review the targets every quarter for the organization. We do a mid-year sort of review around September, October for the organization, and then there's the feedback. So I think that would be a more appropriate sort of framework that you could use for the performance part of it. For the development and the coaching and the promotion part of it, you could bring all these tools in place.
And in my experience, I mean, very small experience that I have about 10, 12 years, more often I see that people see a potential that, somebody can be a people manager or a leader, and they put him into that role or push him into that role, and often start judging too soon. So as you said, that on-the-job training and everything, that becomes really crucial, so that person who's put on that role also gets enough time to learn and get to that level. So just wanted to put that remark.
Yeah, so in my experience, I think in today's environment, professionals are at their prime and around 10 years experience. They've learned everything. And in fact, I feel one of the things that's happening is people are picking up higher and higher responsibility at younger and younger age. When I was growing up and doing the ladders of different organizations, in my mind, I was thinking that I will be a complete profile of whatever I'm doing around 15 years experience. Then I looked around and I found that there are a lot of people with around 10 years experience who are virtually complete, who are ready to pick up responsibility. In recent times, I've even found people with 6-7 years experience to be pretty good. Because the main comment I get when I give this detailed leadership assessment feedback to people, very often in the age of 40, 45 years, sometimes even a little higher than 45 or so, they all say, why didn't I get these inputs earlier?
Yeah.
Why am I getting these inputs in my 40s? Why didn't I get it in my 30s? If I'd got it in my early 30s, I would have learned. So I'm saying bringing these leadership development inputs at the age of 23 and 25 would be a bit premature. But bringing them at the age of around 30, 35 is probably what we require. What the industry is doing, using levels as an indicator and going with these assessment instruments at around 40, 45, and sometimes even higher age. By the time a large part of your career is done. If you can fit forward at 34, 35, build the relevant instruments and the relevant sort of questions over there. You'll be a lot more productive to the individuals and the organization also.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Again, great session. Bye-bye.
Hi, Arvind. Hi, this is Khalil. So, great session. Thanks a lot. I just have a quick, I know you kind of touched upon one of the areas, R&D and innovation. I just want to know some of the advices, when you're working in the innovation and R&D teams, and sometimes the teams could be too young, and the quotient we look for is most into IQ. I do see empathy is a key thing there also, but how do you recommend a leader who is working in those area of innovation, where you need to get things faster and where you have this technology and R&D related?
So I do agree, when you're getting in people into those organizations, you establish like strong cognitive parameters. But when at senior levels, we need to be conscious of the fact that there's a difference between creativity and IQ. You're testing them not just for intelligence, you're also testing them for the ability to create solutions. I can't randomly think of a tool for it, but that's a different issue. So you need to have competencies built for it in your assessment of the people. And even in the R&D organization, a lot of these instruments are still valid, because I think what happens, one of the biggest risks of people at senior level in R&D organization is they sometimes tend to become a little insular in their sort of worldviews, not just in terms of interaction, but insular in their worldviews, in terms of the readings, in terms of the exposures, in terms of talking to people. So in those aspects, those tools could help. But I completely agree with you that in that context, build a contextual scenario first. Start off all the people who are coming into the organization with very high cognitive tools, because you require a high level of intellectual horsepower over there. Build in at the middle manager level some amount of creativity assessment. Like most intelligent people are not necessarily the most creative or innovative. Build a parameter to assess that part of it, because at senior levels, you want more innovative people rather than more intelligent people. And then look at other instruments to ensure that the people are open-minded and they're not insular, and they are good people managers or good stakeholder managers in that context.
Okay, understood. Thanks a lot, Arvind. I think it's very insightful.
Arvind, one question from my side. When we say change and leadership, it's also is change in leadership too. So when a new person joins in a leadership role, quite often in most organizations, you also see there'll be attrition in the team itself. So in such a scenario, what's your take or comment? Should we let go the colleagues and get in new, fresh, young minds, young bloods, or because somebody has been a instrumental part of a team, try to retain them?
It happens a lot. It works both ways, particularly in technology industry. And I won't name the person, but I'll give you the experience. Like I talked about Amitabh as an experience as the second milestone or the third milestone in IBM. When he joined from PricewaterhouseCoopers, because PricewaterhouseCoopers merged into IBM, and we were chatting one day in the evening in terms of what's his style and what's my style and how do I work around with him. One of the things he said, for 6 months, he did not establish any accountability parameters in the team. So I said, why did you do that? Because he had a predecessor who had come and tried to drive change and failed, who had come in from one of the largest projects of IBM, made a business unit head, was successful in the project head environment, $1 billion project, unsuccessful in the global delivery project, had to move out within 6 months. And then they put Amitabh over there. When Amitabh came, he said, for 6 months, I just met people and talked to people. I did not put any strategy, any accountability, any pressure. Because it's what I was taking over was for a large tanker. And therefore I had to understand the layout of the thing rather than start changing the direction. So I think there are two parts of the answer. The first part of the answer is that when a person joins into the organization, and you have a stable, steady organization working under a person, test out the person a lot for understanding your organization and the quality, and have an offline coaching with that person in terms of if I see persons doing two things in an organization, independent of which organization, and my red flags go up. The first thing if I see is that the person constantly referring to the earlier organization, not the current organization. If I'm going to walk into Polaris and constantly use IBM, after 6 months, the guys in Polaris will say that in financial services, we are the masters and we know it. So let's talk about it. So that's one part. And the second is when the person criticizes work which has gone on for years. If something has been done, worked well, stably first. So that's something you need to coach the person offline, not in front of the team. Second, in terms of whether you protect the team or you expose the team, you need to make a judgment based on how much you've invested in this leader as a team. My sense is if you brought in the leader, you wanted a significant change. In that sense, you can coach the team one-to-one, but let them handle the music because you can't protect a team anyway. Let's say if you have 2 or 3 verticals, if you have your platforms vertical, then you have your software development vertical, and then let's say you have a content vertical, it'll be difficult for you to move if there is an aggressive person within the platform portfolio, one of the products coming in. It'll be difficult to move somebody who's put 10 years in platform suddenly to content. That movement is possible, do that. But if it's not possible, coach the individuals how to handle it basically. And once in a while, after you have sufficient data point, get back to the person who is being talked about, saying that these are the issues coming up and you've got to handle it.
Thanks.
Sometimes I found that, and I'm dealing with one organization right now, where I think the CEO took around 2 to 3 years to establish the impact he wanted to make. And there was a lot of resistance for various reasons. But has over the last 1 year delivered on the promise, both client and customers, by taking aggressive calls. So sometimes you've got to give people whom you brought into the organization with the right profile and the right place that time to be successful. And in that time, there will be a certain amount of disruption, at least for the first 1 or 2 years, is my sense.
Thanks, sir.
Hi Arvind, this is Pranay, and a big hello to everybody because today is my first day at the job here in Princess, and I've not met 99% of the team. So big hello to everybody. And Arvind, I mean, I could not control myself because such an interesting session. I had one query. In the beginning, you said that unknown to us in the subconscious, we are creating a perception all the time, whether it's a work situation or it's offline. And you gave an example of a corridor kind of, I mean, an interaction in the corridor in the beginning of the session where it created negative impression. So I just wanted to know, how do we make a balance between intense work situations, the kind of perception that we're creating, and an offline mode, say in a party. I give an example. Say, for example, our intense work situations, which require tough deadlines, we would be focusing more on, say, dominance part or formality and compliance. But if we are in an office party, I mean, then that time the extroversion part becomes more dominant. But again, you because you are perceived in a certain way, you do not want your team to feel conscious of your presence and carry over your perception from one mode to another. So how does one balance or prevent people from getting confusing signals on the perception? Hope I'm able to explain my question.
I thought what you were, and let me rephrase what you were asking me, the question, and correct me if I'm wrong. What you were saying is, how does a person manage the perception which he or she is creating in a new work environment? And within the new work environment, you were asking was, how does one balance the perception which is created within the work side and in the social interactions? Is that correct?
No, it was irrespective of the new or old work environment, because the different situations bring out different aspects of your personality, and hence it creates a perception. So it could be different in for a, say, work situation, especially an intense one, and in a social situation with your colleague. So say, for example, if you are in an office party, you really want to be a part of them and put your hairs down and dance with them. But this would be contradicting how you are handling a tough business situation. So how does one balance the two and prevent confusing signals?
Okay. So my only suggestion is like, and this is based on people I've watched, it's not necessarily my suggestion, because these are based on people I've watched growing well in organizations for long periods of time. The first practical rule is, for the first 6 months of your career, if you can increase your observation and avoid your judgment. People like to hear about suggestions for change from people after they've understood the existing scenario. So that's my first experience, and I keep on going back to that Amitabh Ray experience, that when you're coming into a new organization from outside, give that organization around 5 or 6 months, understand everything, observe everything, make points one-to-one, but don't make strong judgmental points, which will help you to forget about what others feel. It will just open the windows for yourself, help you to perceive a lot of the things. That's one aspect. The second aspect, as I said earlier, like at the end of it, our experiences, education experiences, have helped us to come to the doorsteps of this new organization. What we do in this new organization is valid. So the reference to the past and how it happened elsewhere is not always very relevant in the context of adjusting to the organization. Intensity, I think you focus both on intensity and letting your hair down, that part of it. I think, yeah, if it's an intense work environment, you've got to work in an intensive way. But you need to figure out that whether the intensity needs to stay within you or it needs to be shared with others. That's the point you need to make a judgment. And in terms of socialization, be yourself. I don't think there are any ground rules to say that you shouldn't party harder. In fact, I think the best principles I've seen organizations where you work hard and party hard. So don't control your intensity. But if your intensity is making you stamp on other people's feet, making feedback to the others, or standing out unnecessarily, then it's when you get then you become conscious about it. Because sometimes organizations also want to see what you've got, like whether you're a good sportsman or you're a good dancer or whatever it is. So be yourself is my sense.
Thanks, Arvind. One additional question. How often we should do a self-audit of perception?
Self-audit of yourself?
Yeah, self-audit of the perception that we are creating.
Once in 2 to 3 years is my sense. Like that's why they say all these tools, people often ask the question about validity. These tools are normally valid for 2 to 3 years, but they change over 2-3 years. So I would say once in 3 years for sure, in terms of what's the perception. And they're very simple tools. A 360 tool within the organization is good enough as a tool to start with. And then you can back it up with 1 or 2 instruments.
Thanks, Arvind.
Any other queries or questions we have from any of our colleagues? Feel free to ask a couple of minutes more. I think we're closing the session. If you have any other queries pertaining to change and leadership, go ahead, please.
On a lighter note, you've seen all these leaders out there, from Sundar Pichai to Nadella. So who do you think, on a lighter note, who do you think is your favorite leader out there? Or you see like really extreme qualities, from the Donald Trumps, which is very toxic.
Wish I did have covered that.
Satya Nadella or an Elon Musk or
MS Dhoni, who is the talk of the season now, versus Virat Kohli.
Your experience, you've met a lot of leaders and you've done a lot of research.
Yeah, okay. So I like Dhoni as a leader, and I've seen him in playing. Like I watched the World Cup in Australia, the previous one where we lost out in the semifinals. And my experience about cricket leadership is that the area where the captain really comes into play is when the team is bowling and managing the fielding. Because in batting, there's not much you can do. You can change the orders abruptly, but otherwise it just runs its course. And I've watched a lot of matches at that point in time. That time Virat was being sort of trained to get into it, and Rohit was also there. And I found it amazing how Dhoni used to manage the Indian cricket team. Way better than most of the comparative teams. I think he had a sort of system of playing in the pace bowlers, then changing the field setting, then getting the spinners in, and with keeping in mind the ability of the team, maximizing how well it performs to sort of even choke teams which are far better in batting, let's say Australia and South Africa, etc. So he's always been my favorite. Also the fact that he can take in an enormous amount of pressure but not push it out, which always helps in corporate environment. In terms of corporate America, corporate India, of all I've never worked with American leaders, so don't have a sense. I've just been rejected by Satya Nadella when he was in, I think he was in Microsoft early days. They were setting up Microsoft office in India. And I think they wanted an India HR manager. So I remember going for his interview and him meeting me in the lobby in one of the 5-star hotels in Bangalore. I think it was Sheraton. And him talking only about sports and other things, etc. So he interviewed me, and then afterwards, Microsoft chose somebody else as their leader, manager over there. But I have a very strong, from a more theoretical point of view and from a reading perspective, I liked Steve Jobs in terms of whatever he brought onto the table, the aspiration and the thing about, after I read the book on Steve Jobs, the thing about I realized, particularly from a product-based startup environment, is that he emphasized the process very well. You need to have the technical idea. My idea could be that I will develop instruments for joining mid-career exit, etc. So you need to have the idea. You need to have the team which is technically strong in that idea. You need to have the marketing person, and you need to have the application person. And he's built that framework very clearly over there, which I found very interesting, basically. So that's my exposure. In India, I've worked very closely with Anand Mahindra. You've seen the Scorpio model. So the entire, not from in-depth, but while I was in Anderson, we were a part of the team which selected the new CEO for the commercial vehicles, who's now become the CEO of Mahindra & Mahindra. Did feedback to almost his entire team. And I've liked Anand's style a lot because he gave you a lot of importance as a person who was advising you, no matter how young you were and how mature you were. Therefore, he maximized your potential. He worked along with you to a team. So I used to give feedbacks along with Anand to his team on Saturdays. That was a non-working day, so we used to go and meet in his office, which was like a house. He will take all the inputs in the first 30 minutes and then he lead the process. But he'll always give credit to the content based on which he's giving feedback. So and then the third thing I found him, he was very collaborative. Like whether he's giving a positive feedback, negative feedback to a team member or to a consultant, it will always be dealt with very nicely, which for me is the biggest aspect of leadership. Can you make the person sitting along with you feel good? If you do that, rest of it just follows through.
He's probably the most open CEO in India, right? I mean,
yeah.
Twitter and all. I mean, so quite avant-garde in terms of his age and actually using social media to engage with.
He has a very different style. He has a very informal style.
Yeah. Great. You want to finish up?
Arvind, one last query. I missed the name of the author of the book, The Basic Management Skills, that you talked about in the beginning.
Father E.H. McGrath, Basic Managerial Skills, Tata McGraw-Hill Publications.
Thanks.
Arvind McGraw-Hill is one of our customers.
Oh, sure, you'll get it over there. You can order on.
But there is no Tata McGraw-Hill anymore, so it's just McGraw-Hill.
Oh, it's McGraw-Hill now? Oh, I didn't know that. So I'm probably going back ages.
Thank you so much, Arvind, and to all our impellers. Thanks you to Kavita, who were able to facilitate this session. Looking forward for more such sessions in Breaking Barriers, and thank you once again, Arvind and team. Have a nice weekend.
Nice evening.
Thank you, Arvind.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Arvind. Bye.